Materialism is dead, and science killed it. Scientists just don't want to admit it. For hundreds of years, Western science has operated under a strict dogma, materialism, the belief that the universe is made of dead physical matter, and that your consciousness is just a byproduct, a ghost in the machine. It's a view that strips the universe of meaning, framing you as a cosmic accident. But if you look closely at the bleeding edge of modern science, something extraordinary is happening. The materialist foundation is dissolving. Science isn't replacing ancient mysticism, it's actually finally catching up to them. To understand why materialism is dead, we have to look at the most successful scientific theory ever, quantum physics. In 2022, the Nobel Prize was awarded for experiments that prove that entanglement is real, and thus the universe is not locally real. Local realism is the common sense assumption that physical objects exist independently, holding definite properties whether you're looking at them or not. Now, physics has officially proven that assumption false. Take this golf ball, for example. It looks real. It feels real. I can feel the dimples on the golf ball. But what is it really? As we know from a prior video, that I can feel it and see it as a product of my senses. It's a perception that it is hard, that it has dimples, that it is yellow. But what is it really made of? If you dig into it, you start realizing that inside that golf ball are layers that it's made of, and those layers are made of molecules, atoms inside the molecules, and by the way, those atoms are 99.9% air. There's not much in them. And those atoms are made of subatomic particles that kind of blink in and out of existence from what they call the quantum foam, actually existing those quantum particles as a mathematical wave of possibilities. And beneath those particles come from quantum fields that physicists now think come from one zero-point field that pervades the entire universe. How's it stitched together? With entanglement. So, is this golf ball real, even when I'm not looking for it? As a matter of fact, like a lot of golfers, I can tell you, I've found many of these golf balls disappear even when I'm really looking for them. Albert Einstein famously mocked quantum theory by asking a simple question. Do you really believe the moon exists only when we look at it? Today, the bleeding edge of physics answers with an emphatic no. It doesn't. Matter does not collapse into a solid physical object into the exact millisecond it is observed. Before that, it doesn't exist in a specific place at all. It exists only as a wave of abstract possibilities. Think about that. It means the physical universe at its absolute core is entirely dependent on an observer just to turn on the lights. But this leaves modern science trapped in a massive existential paradox that mainstream materialists are desperate to ignore. Most physicists today contend that the world is fundamentally, physical. But the early pioneers of quantum physics knew that what they had discovered shattered that illusion. So who's right? When modern physicists realized that the observer and the observed are inextricably linked, they didn't discover something new. They stumbled into the ancient bedrock of non-duality. Thousands of years ago, the Upanishads and Eastern mystics, and I would state mystics around the world, have said clearly that the division between the self inside and the world outside is an illusion. Buddhists declared that there are no independent entities, with everything arising interdependently from pure potential. The brilliant minds who founded quantum mechanics realized that physics was pointing directly toward ancient mysticism. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, explicitly stated, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness." Erwin Schrödinger, of the famous Schrödinger equation and the dead or alive cat, deeply studied Eastern philosophy because he realized Western materialism completely failed to explain his quantum data. When these scientists dissected matter down to its baseline, they didn't find solid particles. they found nothing but pure observation. For millennia, mystics said the physical world is Maya, illusion, a projection of a single consciousness. Now, the highest echelons of physics are arriving at this exact same conclusion. But if the smartest minds in history knew matter was an illusion, why is society still clinging to this dead 19th century worldview? It's not that physicists don't have an alternative. Putting consciousness at the foundation clears up almost all of their paradoxes. They cling to it because of the sheer gravity of human intuition. Think about the sun going around the earth. For centuries, it was intuitively obvious that the earth stood still while the cosmos revolved around it. You could walk outside, watch it happen with your own two eyes. You could see the sun rise in the east, set in the west. It clearly went around the earth. Letting go of that illusion was incredibly difficult because humans hate abandoning what feels like common sense. And at the time, it also challenged the reigning power, the church, which wanted us and the earth to be centric. Materialism is our modern version of the sun going around the earth. Because matter feels solid and obvious, we don't want to let it go. And up until now, the materialist assumption has been incredibly successful at helping us manipulate our world. It has shown us how the universe works, but not what it is. That philosophical assumption that all is physical has been buried to the point that many of our greatest minds have now said, philosophy is no longer needed. One way to avoid the question: by refusing to follow where the physics is pointing, mainstream science has trapped itself in a multi-billion-dollar logical dead end that has been called the hard problem of consciousness. Researchers spend massive amounts of funding trying to figure out how 1.5 pounds of wet brain tissue can magically produce the subjective experience of seeing the color red or feeling love. They're looking for an alchemical miracle. But you will never find consciousness inside the brain for the exact same reason you will never find a tiny announcer inside the hardware of your television set. The television doesn't create the signal. It simply modulates it. And once you realize the brain is a receiver rather than the source, it exposes a massive flaw in modern science. Because if the brain doesn't actually create your mind, what happens to you when the brain stops working? The fatal flaw in how we view reality is that we put the cart before the horse. We tried to use matter to explain the mind, when matter is simply what the mind looks like from a specific perspective, our perspective. When you drop fundamental materialism, the universe stops being a cold and different machine. You realize that you aren't an isolated organism fighting to survive in a dead world. You are the very fabric of reality itself, looking back at its own creation. Science isn't destroying spirituality, it is finally validating it. And once we accept that consciousness is the true foundation of everything we experience, the entire universe flips upside down.